One of the biggest confusions when it comes to setting tile is what do I use for my setting material? With so many options out there, you can risk using the wrong Thinset mortar. So in this episode, we're gonna go and clarify those things for you. Stay tuned. Okay, so let's talk about setting material. There's really two different types of setting materials out there. There's the cementatious, there's the organic adhesive, and actually I lied, there's a third category, which is the epoxy based ones. And we're gonna, in this episode, we're gonna talk about cementatious type Thinset mortars, they call them. In a different episode, I talked about the ISO, which is the International Organization for Standardization. And what they do is basically they standardize Thinset mortars, amongst other things, using abbreviations, letters and numbers. And you can check out this link to this video, and it's going to go over the ISO. In this episode, we're going to talk about the ANSI, which is the American National Standards Institute. They have a different approach in terms of how they classify Thinset mortars, and it gets very, very common that you see them on the packages that you see. So it's really important for you to understand what these designations mean so you can pick the right product. Just to kind of clarify, there is no correlation between these two organizations in the way they give standardize these products. They have the different way of setting it, but at the end of the day, they're both very common. You both come down to the same conclusion, is making sure that you're picking the right product for tile. So let's start off with what document is for this. It's the ANSI A118, and it's broken down into different categories. And the first one we're going to start off with is the ANSI A118.1. And what this is the standard dry set mortar. This is your basics you can get, and it's what it has is it can be applied to most tiles. I personally, and most tile contractors will tell you that you don't necessarily want to use this for large format tiles, and there's some applications that these are really good for. These are what's considered the unmodified Thinset. So basically they can be used, for instance, on the Schluter products, and that tends to be used a lot on top of the Schluter product. And so there is usage for these, but what we're seeing more of now is the modified Thinset mortars. And the modified Thinset mortars have the designation A118.4. This is pretty profound. What they set is the minimum standard in terms of using a modified Thinset mortar for all types of different types of tile. And this particular category of mortars, it can pretty much be used across the board in most applications. I say most applications because there's another category which then covers other things, and we're going to get into it in a second. But just so you also know that there's other letters that you might see beside it. So it can be A118.4 E, and what the E stands for is an extended open time, very similar to the ISO. And what it does is it gives that for instance, if it doesn't have the E, it has about a 20-minute kind of open time, and with the E, it extends that a little bit extra and adds that a little more time, on 20-30 minutes. So the other thing that you might see a letter is an F beside it. So go back to the standard, it might be like A118.1 F. You don't see that very common, but so what the F is basically it means it's a fast setting type of mortar. A118.4, it could have like a T attached to it, and what that means is that it has a non-sag performance to it. So which means that if you're applying this a heavy tile to the wall, you want it to not sag so easily. This ability for it to hold its strength and hold the tile in place is very important. And what the designation kind of does is it limits it to about 0.5 millimeter kind of movement, which is amazing for these very heavy porcelain tiles that are out there. But now we're starting to see applications where we require even stronger. When you start getting into very large and very heavy large format tiles, for instance, like 24 by 24s, or 24 by 48, and they keep getting bigger and bigger, and you get into those thin porcelain slabs that are sometimes 10 feet long. Then you start to really look at things like the shear strength of the bond strength of these tiles to hold in place, deformability, all these kind of things become an important factor. And the ANSI designation for these mortars is A118.15. That's basically considered an improved modified dry set mortar. And when I say dry set, don't get confused, it basically just means, think about it like just thin set mortar. The great thing about this category, this is the sort of the latest in terms of all the different types of mortars that have come out. The technology is always improving, and these actually can be applied on exterior surfaces. So if you're installing tile like on a porch, you want to consider using an A118.15 type of tile because it can handle sort of a freeze-thaw kind of environment. The biggest difference I would say between A118.4 and A118.15 is you can look at it from the shear, what they call the 28-day shear bond strength, which is basically after 28 days, what is the strength of this mortar to hold a tile in place. Think about it like this: you put it on a wall and you want that, it doesn't matter how heavy this tile is, you want that mortar to hold the tile in place so that it's not going to fall off at one point because of its weight. So this is very important for wall applications, especially since a lot of heavy tiles are going on the walls. What we see now, so let me throw some numbers at you so you kind of look at the substantial difference between these. The A118.4 for like a glazed wall tile, for instance, is about 300 PSI. By the way, this is all from ANSI, so I'm not making these numbers up. So it's about 300 PSI. And then you look at the A118.15, which is the more improved modified. Now you're seeing 450 PSI of shear bond strength. And again, remember, this is after 28 days of curing, which is the time it takes for it to fully cure. Then we get into like porcelain tiles, mosaic tiles even, and you start to see, for an ANSI A118.4 is about 200, a 118.15 is 400. And then for quarry tiles, it's 150 for the A118.4, and it's A118 for the A118.15, which is the modified improved one, is also 150. So we start to see improvements, especially the difference between these two when we start using these larger, heavy type mortar tiles. So yeah, that's sort of the biggest difference between these two. And there's another category that you might also see as well, is the A118.11. And what this is a separate category where it's also look at the fact that this Thinset mortar can also bond to plywood, because that's a whole other thing, maybe a whole set of different type of chemicals that must be added to it in order to make sure that it's bonded to plywood. Now, I don't always recommend using just plywood as your substrate to install tile. You always should have some kind of an underlayment, because plywood is not the best source as a form of a substrate. It expands and contracts. So in any case, they have had that. So another interesting thing you might see is the Thinset mortar might have one or more of these designations. So it might have A118.15, but it also might have A118.11. So which means that it's not only good for plywood, but it's also good for outdoors, heavy, large format tiles. A lot of times you might see also the word light written on the packaging, and what that means is that it's a light kind of mortar. So what it does is it has a different type of property to it, and most of these type of tiles have A118.15 designation. So I guess the conclusion here to take away from this, given the way the industry is headed, a lot of people want sort of the larger tiles, is make sure you're taking a look at the designation that's given on that tile. Whether you're looking at it from the ISO designation or the ANSI designation, you want to make sure that it's classified to the type of tile you're looking to use. If you're installing a large format tile that's very heavy, and you know that you need some of that shear bond strength, let's say you put it on a shower wall, for instance, which happens a lot right now, you want to make sure that the Thinset mortar that you're using is an A118.15. If you're using a smaller tile and that's not necessarily something of a concern to you, or if you don't have to worry about things like sag performance and all that, then you don't need to spend that extra money on mortar that is A118.15, because obviously those mortars are a lot more expensive. You can get away with using like a modified A118.4 that is going to be perfectly fine in those applications. So just something to keep in mind is not every mortar is good for all situations. Yes, maybe an A118.15, an improved modified mortar, can be applied to everything, but you can say like you're paying extra when you don't really need to be paying that extra. So that's another reason why it may be getting the best, the top of the line type of thing is renders useless because you could have gone away with just using some of the basic stuff that are out there. Hope you guys learned something from this video. Thank you very much for listening. Put a few links to other videos that you might be interested in this playlist. Check out our other videos. I will put a link to the ISO 13007 documentation or designations video that I made, so that if you see those designations also, you can make the right decisions when it comes to picking a setting material for your tile. Thanks a lot.